It's November 20th, 1985, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Arion, Rebecca, and Olly, the Retrospectors.
Anyone millennial or younger is probably too young to remember this, but I'm here from the distant past before Windows came out to tell you that if you booted up your PC back in the olden days, you were usually greeted by little more than the letter C, followed by a colon, a forward slash, and a greater than symbol. And that was it. From there, you just had to kind of know what to type into that prompt to make your device do anything at all. But that all began to change, for PC users at least, with the release of Windows 1.0 today in history in 1985.
But where did you upload your videos to, Grandad?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What did you use for social networking?
Yeah, this was the day that Windows 1.0, Windows 1 for simplicity, was released to marketing in the US. And that's basically the tech equivalent of a ribbon-cutting ceremony. It's confirmation that it's finished and ready to go to market, so the marketing process can begin for release to the public. And in the most basic terms, it made it possible for an ordinary person to use a computer without any programming knowledge. And the key word is graphical. It was a graphical user interface. And earlier operating systems, as you were alluding to, Arion, back in the days of yore, were text-based, meaning that if you wanted to do anything, you needed to know what commands to type in. But Windows made navigation visual. Everything was labelled for you. And in fact, the name Windows wasn't just a cute nod to one of the visual components, but a reference to one of its USPs, what was then a cutting-edge navigation feature. And in fact, during development, before it got to the shiny marketing people, the product was simply referred to internally as the less evocative interface manager.
Yeah, the concept is, imagine this, folks. You can have a clock and a calculator and a document and a game of solitaire all on your screen at the same time. But of course, the reality was, although you could see them all at the same time, processors couldn't actually handle multiple apps. Each one would freeze whilst you played with the one you were in. So it was actually functionally completely useless. You could see the time as it was 10 minutes ago before you started typing in the document. But in theory, in marketing terms, this was a big sell, a graphical user interface, or GUI, as they were called in Silicon Valley. And this one on this day came out with Paint, Windows Writer, Notepad, calculator, and a game called Reversi. It's still quite dependent, of course, on that underlying infrastructure of the black screen, MS-DOS. Early Christmas quiz question. Do you remember what that stands for, MS-DOS?
Microsoft
Good.
Digital Operating System.
Very close. Disk Operating System. So yes, Microsoft had actually built their reputation on creating a user-friendly text interface, DOS. But the issue with that was you had to memorize long strings of text commands to be able to use it, which is fine for nerds who work in the computer department of businesses you're selling to, but not so good, as of course Steve Jobs had already understood, for consumers who want to point and click. So what they were doing with Windows was building on DOS a graphical interface that could mirror what was going on underneath. That sort of ended up being its strength, but also its weakness, though, because as a developer, if you're making stuff for DOS, by definition, that's going to work on Windows, because Windows is built on DOS. So why would you bother making something for Windows?
Yeah, I think that was the thing, that Windows 1.0 sat on top of MS-DOS rather than being a complete replacement for it. And the boxed product required a really capable PC for the time. You had to have 2 floppy drives or a hard disk and at least 256 kilobytes of RAM. Can you imagine such giddy peaks of computing power? But so the product appeared in stores in late November in 1985, and the market reaction was just kind of meh. People didn't know what to do with it, partly because the product wasn't that good yet, but partly also because they'd sold it in this kind of add-on way rather than saying, here's your new way of interacting with a computer, and it's the only one.
Yeah, that was sort of Microsoft's strength and weakness in a way, is that if you wanted to, Apple had already done a graphic interface by this time for the Apple Lisa in 1983, but you had to buy an Apple computer in order to see it. That was, an extreme expenditure at the time. Whereas the great thing about Microsoft is that it was made to make software for existing PCs, mostly IBM. So you didn't need to go out and buy a whole new computer just to see Microsoft Windows. You could purchase it and use it on your existing one if it had those astronomical amounts of processing power.
Yes. I mean, it's all about the vision, isn't it? That Bill Gates in particular, but Paul Allen had as well at Microsoft, that there should be, you'll have heard this before, even if you've just got a very cursory understanding of what they did, a computer on every desk and a computer in every home. And I mean, really, they didn't hit that mark until Windows 95. And I always wondered, why did they put the year in the title of Windows 95? It's such a weird, it's not 2000. Why call it Windows 95? It immediately sounds old in 1996. And now I realise it's because it had been 10 years exactly since 1985 when this version came out and wasn't very popular. And really, it took 10 years to develop the product as it should be, something that was intuitive and cheap and widely available and dominant. And I think you can understand then why they put the year in and wanted to celebrate the fact they'd achieved so much, actually, in 10 years. That momentum is now not uncommon for a large tech company, but then must have felt really unprecedented. But to get there, even the years up to this point were years. And Bill Gates's background was building stuff in garages where he and a mate could build something in a weekend and say, look, we've done this amazing thing, aren't we clever? Put us on the front of Fortune. And Windows was a product that took years to develop. And every time they were about to release it, they were like, oh, now Apple's brought out Lisa. Oh, now IBM are going to do their own version of Windows. Oh, now we're going to have to change the disk technology. And I mean, they eventually released it on this day. They could have just never released it, just waiting to catch up with what was obviously going to happen, this big momentum towards GUIs.
And then Windows 3.0, which came out in 1990, that was the one that started to feel like proper Windows as we understand it today. And soon, after that time and heading towards Windows 95, that was when the big hardware makers had caught up and their machines now supported the thing that Bill Gates and, let's face it, various other people across Silicon Valley had in mind when they were trying to build these graphical interfaces. But the big hardware makers, Dell, Compaq, Gateway, and various others, all got on board with Windows. So by the time you got to Windows 95, that's when the network effect really started to kick in. Windows was the thing that people were looking for when they went to get a computer. So they'd get any computer that had Windows, and that gave Microsoft a near monopoly across the industry to launch whatever future software it wanted because it controlled the operating system that 90% of people by the mid-90s were using.
Yeah, I mean, Windows 95, the feature it had that distinguished it in particular was that it had Internet Explorer, and that introduced millions of people to the internet. It was the first time lots of people had gone online, was through that specifically, and that really helped cement it as the dominant operating system on the market. And actually, that's just another indication of what had happened since the release of Windows 1 wasn't just that the technology had improved, which it had, but also that the market that Microsoft had envisioned it for had finally developed. One of the issues that held back Windows 1, apart from the sort of lackluster performance, was the fact that they just didn't have that casual PC user market. That wasn't really a thing. I mean, even the year before it was released, Greg Williams, writing in Byte, he was talking about the reaction to Apple's new Macintosh 128K, which had a graphical operating system. He wrote, a few traditional computer users see the mouse, the windows, and the desktop metaphor as silly, useless frills. So even in the 80s, you still had this notion that computers were something for people who had studied computer science, and some people wanted to keep it that way. And I mean, in retrospect, they were probably right.
We would have ended up with a different president. But I do think that the title, Windows, considering the amount that by comparison Steve Jobs is called a marketing genius, is a better name than Macintosh, isn't it? You understand what it is. You are resizing different windows on your screen. And that was a term that was being used internally and then ended up being put on the product, which, as you said, was going to be called Interface Manager, by Roland Hansen, who was in charge of marketing at Microsoft and wanted them to own the generic product name. He realized that there were all these products being developed across the market that were windowing products, so why didn't they own the word Windows? And it was also he who decided that Microsoft should always have the word Microsoft as the first word in the two-name title of all their products, which, when you think about it, is how we all grew up, right? Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Publisher. That was him. I mean, until then, Microsoft was just the label that was going to be on the box. So it was a massive branding exercise for them, to the extent that, as you said, once the market had saturated and got to peak, the products you wanted was the Microsoft suite of products. And if it didn't have that Microsoft name on it, even though there were many rivals doing the same thing, you thought it wouldn't be as good. And the thing is, I mean, there are still people out there who say, you know, Apple is the superior software, or Android now is the superior software. I don't use anything Microsoft. It's all glitchy and cheap and whatever. And I have some sympathy with that, because all the products I own are Apple, but the back end of most computers remains Windows. And you think what a difference this innovation made, even though no one appreciated it at the time. You know, whenever you scan your membership card in at the gym, the computer letting you in is a Windows machine. When you self-checkout in Tesco, it's a Windows machine. When you get money out of an ATM, it's a Windows machine. So it's just like, every computer that's all around us was changed by this day in history.
Exactly. And it is that omnipresence that made Windows such a dominant piece of software. You know, eventually when the US Department of Justice led this antitrust case against Microsoft between 1998 and 2001, they were accusing Microsoft of using its monopoly of owning the, you know, operating system of pretty much everyone's computer to crush competitors, particularly Netscape, which was the browser that lost the browser wars because Internet Explorer came bundled with Windows, and Windows was cheap, and Windows was on all the computers that you wanted. And so they were victim almost of their own success. And although Microsoft avoided being broken up, the case exposed its enormous influence and how big it had grown.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully we don't have any dominant players in the market today, and if you disagree with me, you can find me on LinkedIn or Xbox.
To hear more from us on this topic, join Club Retrospectors now. Unlock our weekly bonus bits at patreon.com/retrospectors.